Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a great honor and pleasure to be here today in Athens with so many Greek friends in the room. When Economist Impact set the program on the three-day conference and designed a panel around defense and security in the Eastern Med region, nobody would have bet that Hamas would have hit Israel like never before. This conference would have probably mentioned the tensions between Israel and the Palestinians' occupied territories as, if I may, business as usual, when it may turn into a war with overspilling effects in the whole region and beyond. I had been with my friend Annegret, Minister of the Armed Forces, me for France, for 5 years, from 2017 to 2022. Over the last 6 years, I'm not sure that peace and stability have improved worldwide. To phrase it bluntly, very few of you would have bet that war would be back in Europe. Still it is. And very few of you would have bet that war might be back in the Eastern Med involving Israel. Still it is. As my government came into office in 2017, we conducted a review of threats facing France, and the results was not entirely reassuring. After 2 decades of peace dividends, we were waking up to a world where the West, and therefore democracies, gradually had to share hegemony, a world where power politics were back in Russia, in China, a world where new worrying trends had emerged. Terrorism spread and would not be some Trojan fit for violence like the Red Brigades in the old days. It would be the fight of a generation, and we are back to that. New fields of conflict also were confirmed: cyber, space, seabed. And meanwhile, as a part of a more general retreat from multilateralism, international regimes, proliferation norms, arms control rules were on the wane. So this is not a pleasant mix. And this is a recipe for confrontation. On top of the last 30 years, since the end of the Cold War, economic interdependencies have grown very significantly, boosted by the international trade growth that has started after 1945 and globalization. Confrontation hits borders again in Europe, killing soldiers and civilians. Confrontation hits Israel and the Palestinians. Confrontation hits our economies, hits finance, technologies, and hits multilateralism as well. In this environment, the Eastern Med is and has always been a hot spot. The Med Sea is a key area between Europe, Africa, and Asia, bridging 22 countries and hosting more than 500 million inhabitants. The eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea looks like a boiling pot where old and unsolved conflicts, contested maritime areas, assertive regional powers, rearmament, strategic competitors are mixed together. Powers are back in the Med Sea, creating growing tensions with, in the eastern backstage, a fight for gas resources. The US focus on rivalry with China that has started more than 10 years ago is bolstering the confidence of countries such as Iran and Turkey, which are seeking to assert themselves as regional powers. Both seize all opportunities to advance their interests. These reconfigurations are leading to instability and strategic environment deterioration in the region. As a consequence, rearmament has never been as dynamic in the area for decades. Turkey, a NATO ally, provides armament and military support to Libya, despite the UN arms embargo. The Turkish Navy has or had, I don't know, a permanent presence off Cyprus due to political and territorial dispute related, among others, around gas drilling. Turkey has been increasing its military investment for years, building a national defense industry able to provide cheaper, still efficient equipments, such as drones, that were used in Azerbaijan or in High Karabakh. Russia has been increasing its presence in East Med since President Obama's decision not to launch a strike against chemical sites in Syria in 2013. Russia has now a permanent presence with a naval base in Tartus, an air base in Latakia. However, the number of Russian ships in the East Med has significantly decreased since the beginning of Ukraine's invasion, as the Black Sea has turned into a closed sea. Iran has been providing armament and capabilities to non-state organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas for years, and we can see the result with thousands of rockets being fired against Israel. Last but not least, the United States is back in the Med Sea after years of disengagement. Since 2022, the US Navy has been back, and more recently, since the attack of Israel by Hamas, the US sent 2 airstrike carriers sailing along the Israeli coast that were able to neutralize Houthi missiles launched against Israel. Now, the Eastern Med is going to turn into an explosive area. The attack of Israel by Hamas on October 7th brings the whole region and beyond to climax. It's quite a long time that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is developing with more downs than ups. In the recent years, it was in 2021, clashes between Israeli police and Palestinians turned into full-scale fighting. The death toll was the highest since the Gaza war in 2014. The fragile ceasefire that began late May 21 broke into pieces with the unprecedented terrorist attacks that took place on the 7th of October this year. The death toll of such a massacre is by far much higher than ever. An estimated 1,400 Israelis were killed by Hamas, mostly civilians, with hundreds more taken hostage and still accounted for. Strikes on the Gaza Strip to neutralize Hamas leaders and fighters have led to thousands of Palestinian casualties. Palestinians are massively displaced to the southern part of Gaza, and a huge humanitarian disaster is in place, despite the very welcome delivery of humanitarian aid through the Egyptian border that has started last weekend on a too small scale, unfortunately. I'm no longer representing the French government and have no special intelligence insight to share or not to share. After the brave visit paid by President Biden to Israel last week, and after other European leaders' visits, President Macron just arrived in Israel today for a two-day visit to express France's solidarity with Israel. I'm truly convinced that he will make his best efforts first to get our hostages and all the hostages freed after having repatriated our fellow citizens to France. He will call certainly the parties to avoid escalation and to comply with the international humanitarian rules. And I'm sure that he will advocate for resuming a genuine peace process leading to the two-state solution with a Palestinian state next to Israel, ensuring Israel's security. This implies to end the settlement process. As a first step, President Biden succeeded in convincing Egypt to let the humanitarian aid being delivered in Gaza. The diplomatic efforts made by the United States, the Europeans, and some neighboring countries should not deter Israel to react, but hopefully deter to overreact. Looking forward, it would not be an easy process, but a peace process deserves to be initiated again. Remember our hope after Oslo's agreement when it was concluded. It was a strong hope for peace, and it is our collective responsibility to mobilize our brains and energy to make it happen. So I will conclude with two questions and one conviction. The first question is, what will be the consequences of new Israel-Hamas war? I can identify a few of them, even if it's very difficult and unforeseeable. Already visible are the recent terrorist attacks in Belgium, in France, as an indirect outcome of the Israel-Hamas conflict. We knew that fighting against terrorism was not over in Europe, in the Middle East and Africa, and we remain fully committed to it. Second, Abraham's agreements will significantly probably be delayed, but probably not given up. Third, the US is back in Europe, and we are extremely grateful for the US support, strong support, delivered to Ukraine. And the US is back in the Middle East also, by necessity for sure, but is back, while its Asian focus will not be lowered. But it does not mean for us as Europeans that we could do less for our defense and security. So there is a strong need for partnership and for building a security architecture. And when Europe's security is at stake, Europeans should be around the table. I have in mind the INF Treaty, which concerns Europe's security, and that was signed by the US and the USSR a long time ago, and that was ended up by the United States and Russia in 2019. There is also a strong need for NATO-EU cooperation instead of competition. Happily, it is now fully recognized and mentioned in the Vilnius NATO Summit communique released in last July. More broadly, we must find ways to extend our partnerships to create alliances of countries willing to keep the international rules alive. Second question, what will the new world order look like? We know where we come from. We inherited from the rules-based order from those who fought during World War II. We don't know what the new world order will be made of, but it may look even more fragmented, with opportunistic positioning from nations sticking to their interest and partnering accordingly. In a mood of hostility, or at least distrust vis-à-vis the West, as we can see developing in the so-called Global South. As a result, the West may be more united, but more isolated from the rest of the world. That's something we must solve. And less superpowers, and probably more powers able to destabilize the others. I will end up my speech by expressing my strong conviction and that in this new and dangerous environment, Europe has a major role to play. I've always been convinced that Europe needs to be able to defend itself without depending too much on others, and that Europe is a major economic power, having the largest consumer market worldwide. I have constantly advocated for it with my European colleagues, as Annegret knows. We launched together, she launched the strategic compass during the German presidency. And as France, we made it approved early 2022. And that was one of the great achievements we made together, as well as the European Peace Facility, which was approved a few days before Russia invaded Ukraine. We, as Europeans, just got an up and running tool to fund and provide military equipment to Ukraine worth than more 12 billion euros. That was a remarkable achievement. However, lots of challenges must be addressed. Contrary to the United States or Russia, we doesn't have oil or gas. We doesn't have a single European military. We are moving fast, maybe not as fast, to take care of our weaknesses. We must keep in mind that we, as Europe, have our own interest, and whatever the links that united us with our ally, the United States, sometimes these interests may be a bit different from those of the United States. That's why President Macron, from the very beginning of its first mandate, called for a European sovereignty. He not only called for it, he fought for it, convincing his European colleagues to go for it. So, don't get me wrong, I'm not naive about where Europe stands from its autonomy standpoint. But it would be extremely naive to believe that our interests would be better taken into account by someone else, including our best allies. Thank you.